we finally start to believe that McLaren are front runners again? Well, I mean, if you're their team boss, then yes, they are.
And you know that Red Bull team, yeah, they're going down. Whoa, Andrea, let's not get crazy here. Or could we?
But in all seriousness, McLaren have had the best start to a season since 2012, whereas Mercedes have had the worst start to a season since 2012. As a result, it seems like the balance of power at the front is really starting to shift. We are no longer thinking of Ferrari as being all up and down. McLaren's starting to look consistently like a front-running team again, whereas Mercedes, well, let's just say politely they're going through a phase. They might be back, they might not be. Trust me, the McLaren phase was very long. It's getting so good for McLaren, having nearly 50 sponsors attached to your name is simply not enough. You need a title sponsor, which McLaren surprisingly doesn't have. But now, it's looking likely that MasterCard might be partnering with them. They're the favourite to pick a side. What? MasterCard? Oh no. Oh no. The flashbacks. Lola. No. Sospiri! Sorry. 1997 came back to my head. MasterCard, do not do the same to McLaren.
But on the other hand, we would have MasterCard McLaren Mercedes. No, seriously, the acronym would be MMM. McLaren's form right now has been just as delicious.
And also a bit of a shock, because when the team came to Shanghai, they were expecting the party to end after scoring the most points in 4 races in over a decade. But instead of the party being over, it seems like the party's just gained an extra DJ and they've turned the volume up. Nobody at the Woking team was expecting them to be that good, and you can attribute a lot of that to Lando Norris. It might have been even better had a certain Canadian not wrecked a certain Australian's floor. And all of that was done without the supposed significant upgrade. That's coming for the next race in Miami. A lot of really interesting things are coming for Miami. I just noticed Mercedes are getting their upgrade, McLaren's getting their upgrade, Ferrari's going to be turning blue. I wonder if it's compensating for something that the Miami track is just simply not that good, so they need other distractions, including a sprint race. I see through you, Formula One management. But as a long-term McLaren fan, we were all expecting Shanghai to be a really low-key event. We were bracing ourselves for maybe only one car getting points, and even Stella himself was expecting it to be a damage limitation exercise. That's why I wasn't predicting them to be in the top 5. I was expecting the worst, because for many years we've been expecting the worst. We've had so many false dawns, and now it's real. I know Silverstone 2023 was real, but now it's really, really real. McLaren are back. We got a completely different, albeit pleasant, surprise, as Stella says right here. Ahem. In fairness, we came here thinking this was a damage limitation event. You see what I said? You just said it there. But actually, it's been our most competitive event. Pole position for the sprint. I think in the sprint would have been possibly a second place finish without the issue at corner 1. Yesterday competitive in qualifying and again a strong race. So clearly we have to fine tune something in our understanding, but Formula One often surprises you because it's sensitive to so many parameters. But anyhow, good result, good surprise. I'm really happy for the men and women at McLaren. Great effort. Quite right, Andrea, great effort. Now, just in case it's not clear to you, I am a McLaren fan. I have the hat, I have a classic portrait of Senna and Prost, I even have a McLaren ride-on remote control car for my kid when they're old enough. So, yeah, you don't need to question my bias because it's quite plain for you all to see. I'd rather just be honest with you.
And you know things are good with McLaren at the moment because there's an animated series attached to them. Instead of it being tuned, though, it's like a Lego short series, but it's kind of cute. And for those of you in the know, too much power!
The overall mood at McLaren is the best it's been since as long as I can remember. They're now firmly in P3 at the moment, 44 points ahead of Mercedes, who are not really thinking about McLaren at the moment. Right now, they're mainly focused on not having Aston Martin overtake them, albeit that being quite easy at the moment because they're effectively just racing one car. If you know, you know.
It's because Lance was getting down and dirty with Daniel's rear end.
So now that means the Papaya team is flying the flag for Mercedes instead, with Lando Norris scoring a P2 in China, albeit with the aid of the safety car, which did relegate Checo to third, but hey, this is payback for Silverstone last year. We could have seen a double podium for McLaren then, had it not been for a safety car, which relegated Oscar Piastri to fourth place, so I guess it's just swings and roundabouts. And since Red Bull has plenty of those in their hometown of Milton Keynes, I'm sure they have plenty to spare, so McLaren, there's a roundabout on the house. I've been really cautious with McLaren over the years. There have been so many hiccups since 2014, so many false dawns. I think the most egregious one was back in 2018. You might think that I might be just completely delusional, but when you go back to the first 4 races of that season, it was looking pretty rosy. Both cars were scoring points. Fernando got a P5 in the opening race. You remember that radio soundbite of his of, "Now we can fight"? Yeah, the only bit of fighting you were doing, Fernando, in that season was just fighting your car back to the pits on 2 wheels in Baku, and you still scored points. If you want a great example as to why Fernando Alonso is so good, go and watch Baku 2018. He's a machine in a really crap machine. 2023 though, that proved to be a genuinely real dawn. It was a monumental turnaround for that team. It proved that all of the investment that had been done over the last couple of years, coming out of the Rona period where it looked really likely the team was about to go under, they had a complete change in structure where all the upgrades that they had were working. The correlation was perfect. Every single thing they brought to that car worked. It added performance. And therefore, every time they mentioned upgrades, us McLaren fans were salivating. It took them from fighting Alpine to fighting Ferrari and Mercedes within a space of a few months, and even sometimes Red Bull. In fact, Stella believes that if things continue the way they do, then McLaren could be fighting Red Bull in terms of race wins consistently by this time next year, for the 2025 season. Now, that might seem to you a little bit far-fetched. We've been conditioned after many years of Red Bull dominance and Verstappen dominance that anyone else who isn't Carlos Sainz winning a race? Preposterous. But it might not be as crazy as you think. If any season is going to yield a result where Red Bull aren't as dominant, it's gonna be in 2025. We're about to come up to a brand new regulation change. Teams are going to be seriously considering what do. Do they just do a Hail Mary and go for glory in 2025, knowing that it would compromise their 2026 season? Or do they play it safe, not progress in development as much, and go for that following year? And that's the guessing game that we're going to be seeing. Do McLaren make the most of this opportunity to bag some wins, more prize money, albeit with less ATR time and wind tunnel time for the new car? That's the real guessing game. I can't wait for that season. It's going to be good. But the one entity who thinks McLaren can really score wins not just next year, but this year is Lando Norris. What? F1's biggest pessimist? A guy with a glass half empty attitude as mooted by Nico Rosberg?
As many long-term Lando fans would probably guess, it's probably full of milk. Whole milk, by the way. I can't believe one of the biggest takeaways of the video of mine is that there was skimmed milk in the video.
But Lando is serious, and I think this is genuinely a cause for celebration and optimism. Because back in 2020 and 2021, Lando had really strong starts to the season, and usually when Lando has a really good start to a year, it usually manifests itself further down the line. And this is the spiciest start to a season he's ever had. In 5 races, he's had 2 podiums, and that's absolutely fantastic. Lando reckons that this can be built upon and that a win could come for them this year, but it would be difficult, which is a reassuring sentiment. Wins aren't guaranteed to come McLaren's way because we've got to remember, the RB20 exists, Max Verstappen exists. There has to be other conditions and other parameters getting in the way for McLaren to bag a win right now. But I can see why he thinks that in the here and now, because everyone was expecting Ferrari to remain the second fastest team for quite a while, but in China, they were not. Yes, Leclerc managed to stay in the top 4 and is the only driver to have been in the top 4 so far this season, but their performance though was not quite second strongest material. But at the same time though, things really change very quickly. Lando's mood is very much up and down because earlier that day, he was joking about having a bet with somebody as to how far behind the Ferraris the McLarens would be. And I think his bet or guess was like 35 seconds or something. Well, that turned out not to be the case. Lando in that MCL 38 on that day was phenomenal. And you can't take that away from him. even though he did have a rocky time of it just 24 hours before, where he managed to bag that sensational pole, which did actually land itself in the court of controversy because of the whole lap time deleted, next lap time deleted, mitigating circumstances, all that stuff. Yeah, but he still got the pole, and I'm still glad that he did. And then we all know what happened afterwards. Lando should not have fought Lewis in the sprint. The W15 is not as good of a car as the MCL38 even before the upgrade. There was no need to fight Lewis, and I just get the impression that Lando just tries too hard. There's a lot on the line. There's an opportunity to bag a win. Somebody's challenging you for that win. You have to stop them. And Lando now admits that maybe he should not have fought Lewis that hard, but that just seems to be the situation. When Lewis and Lando are fighting, this has been the case for many years, even when McLaren weren't as competitive, that when you put those two together and challenge for a position, it just seems to be intensified. Lando doesn't fight anybody nearly as much as Lewis Hamilton, and that ultimately led to him going wide at the first corner. He then lost the lead, and even Stella admits that that could have been a second place or a third place had he remained just behind Lewis. Maybe he could have overtaken him in Sector 2, where McLaren were mighty in the speed traps, all because of just desperation and stubbornness, and that is something that Lando really needs to get over. Sure, stubbornness does come up in the case of Max Verstappen, but it does need to be tempered when there's a win to be had, which is why Oscar is always compared to him. He got a sprint win first, ahead of Lando, because Lando made mistakes in the sprint qualifying and shootout all over that weekend. That needs to stop, because it's now losing them positions. But it's getting there. Hopefully this is the last time it happens. But again, in his defense, he is aware of it, and that he is looking to change that. Because the pressure right now is incredibly immense. He's becoming the bastion of British racing drivers in Formula 1. It's quite clear that Lewis Hamilton is handing over the torch not to his teammate George Russell, but to Lando Norris. The bond that they have is seemingly much stronger than Lewis has with George, because George right now is busy managing the transitional phase of Mercedes, going down to a midfield team. Maybe they might come back again in a couple of years, but George has his hands full, whereas Lando is going for glory, and Lewis knows it. And yes, you might be saying that, oh, well, Lewis going to Ferrari might temper that change, he might be good again, but he might not be. There's uncertainty. Even though it is a really fantastic opportunity for Lewis, right now, Lando is looking like the better British driver. And therefore, Lando is going to try and want to prove himself. And therefore, more eyes are going to be on him as McLaren are changing themselves into a proper front-running outfit. They, I reckon, are the best when it comes to operations and things being where they're supposed to be. They are good to go for a title fight, or at least getting wins solidly again, instead of having to rely on luck or Max just having a bad day. The McLaren car is improving more and more, with a new wind tunnel now online, and 2025 being the first season where it provides the team an entirely developed car and will be hugely important for 2026. And it's entirely possible that Stella's 12-month claim isn't entirely ridiculous, just a little bit overly optimistic, but sometimes optimism can be healthy for a team. But right now, Red Bull and Max are seemingly untouchable, at least on the track. That being said though, in comparison to previous years, Lando has been able to bounce back much faster. It's just proving to me more and more that Lando is no more, as David Croft would subscribe, little Lando Norris, but instead he is now turning into what I call Lando Prime. He is having to deal with a lot more pressure now, and he's seemingly able to respond to it when things aren't going his way. Instead of taking multiple races to get over things and remaining incredibly morose, he's able to just take it on the chin. He can be sad for a while, that's okay, but then come back again the next day and put in a banger result, meaning that lots more people forget about that mistake, but, you know, not quite dismissing it entirely. Lando Prime, I think, is in its clearest definition than I've ever seen it, and that's why I think McLaren are ready to become a front-running team and remain one. They needed a strong lead driver who can come back from mistakes rapidly, and also spring some surprises, which is what Lando did in Shanghai, and he even surprised himself, and made Oscar's time of it all the more sobering. Yes, I think it's quite clear that right here I prefer Oscar over Lando, but I like them both as a package and what they're doing for the team. And sometimes being the fan of a driver is being aware of the mistakes that they have made, and that it's all part of the learning process, that you can't just blindingly love them and admonish them of any wrongdoing or any mishaps, because it happens. Even Oscar admits that he wasn't good enough and that he needs to be better. And that's what you need to be sometimes. You just need to admit that you didn't do as good as you hoped, that you've got to own the errors or own the mediocrity, which is what we've seen a little bit so far, a little bit too much for my liking, but I just got to acknowledge it, that, yeah, 2 fourth places, that's pretty good, especially when you've got a Mercedes that's not looking all that bad, and you've got a Red Bull and Ferrari right up there, and that's pretty good, especially in Jeddah. Oscar was pretty solid. But the time gap to him and Lando is still pretty big, even though the qualifying gap is a little bit smaller. There are swings and roundabouts here. Again, Milton Keynes, Red Bull, they've got plenty going spare. Oscar is still too harsh in his tyres, which is tempering the hype from his rookie season somewhat. But when you look past all of that, and what his mere presence in that team means for them, and what it means for his more experienced teammate, Piastri's signing right now may not be getting blockbuster results for him, but it's starting to get more and more of them for the leader of McLaren, which is what the team needs. They need a leader bagging the results. He needed a strong teammate that could question him, that could challenge him. Daniel Ricciardo, many thought, would be that person that would then ignite Lando into a response, take away that leadership mantle, but it didn't. Instead, it gave Lando the feeling that he was invincible. Any driver would feel incredible that they managed to beat that driver into submission, but then in comes this rookie off the back of a contract controversy, which makes them look like a villain in the public eye, and then he just keeps his head down, doesn't get rattled, he then starts to get the results, nearly has a podium in Silverstone, then gets a sprint win, a victory before you, and then gets another podium as well on top of that, and nearly scoring 100 points in their first year, which is something that Lando as a rookie did not do. Yes, the McLaren car of 2019 wasn't as good as the McLaren of 2023, but the fact remains that it happened. Lando was rattled, but he's managed to come back from that, whereas Oscar's performance has been limited somewhat, but it'll come, but just not right now. But I think Oscar needed to be in that team to really give Lando something to think about, and it's working. And it might change over time, it might get a little bit more fractious, but right now, Lando Norris needs a really good, strong year. McLaren can provide that for him, which is why he signed that contract extension and didn't give in to temptation to go over to Red Bull. The era of their recovery is coming to an end, and podiums are not becoming a pleasant surprise anymore, they're becoming the expectation on a regular basis. So by the time Lando feels like he's reached the state of Lando Prime and Oscar's fully managed to learn the car and therefore not be as cruel to his tyres, it might mean that that combination of Piastri and Norris might be one of the most impressive lineups on the entire grid. Helmut Marko says that himself, that Norris and Piastri are still very much on the Red Bull radar, even though they've been locked down in ironclad contracts. They are still very, very hot property, even though they're McLaren property. That is saying something. Having those two drivers in that team at the same time, right now, when McLaren are changing for the better, they're looking in much ruder health than they have been since the early 2010s, when there was Lewis Hamilton and Jenson Button. That's huge. Lando has served his time. He's ready to go. And I really don't think it's going to become a problem. We are not going to see what many people are thinking is what's happening at Ferrari right now, and will definitely happen next year at Ferrari. McLaren are going to be incredibly dogmatic when it comes to team orders. They are not going to allow Lando and Oscar to have fights. They are going to dictate the pace, and trust me, McLaren have plenty of experience when it comes to team orders and how to deal with them. That's really important to think, you know. All the big controversies regarding team orders, it's usually been revolving around McLaren, or sometimes Ferrari. But yeah, Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna, need I say more. McLaren, I believe, are already in the position where everything is present and accounted for to match the likes of Red Bull, with two drivers who put the team first, who get along well with one another, Lando galvanizing himself, and Oscar being completely unbothered when it comes to being a Formula 1 driver. I have never seen him get angry or even really annoyed. He gets sometimes a little bit irked with himself and he gets a little bit grumpy on the radio, but then he comes in with these really big comebacks. That comment about Lance Stroll saying, yeah, well, no one else crashed. He comes up with these zingers and he's completely unfazed. He needs a motivator in the same car as him. And it really works out for McLaren as well, that Lando and Oscar's driving styles are not all that different, so you don't need to compromise one driver for the sake of the other, which is going to make McLaren all the more spicy, and why I think second place could be something that they might get a hold of toward the end of the year. But third place, I think that's safe for them. That third place is gifted to them on merit, because many people in 2020, when McLaren got P3, disputed that and saying, oh, they only got that because Racing Point got docked 15 points. They otherwise would have had 4th place. But no, this time McLaren can be proud and said P3 is theirs. I do think that McLaren can win a race next year. 2024 though, it's going to be tough. But I think it might be possible. 2023, it looked really close, but McLaren just weren't quite there when Max and the RB19 were there. It needed that little bit extra, and Lando did not have it at that time. Now though, maybe. Shanghai was the turning point. I'm really excited for Miami. Miami, which is interminably boring and unappealing. The gimmick is now dead. Now we've at least got something to look forward to. Not just the blue Ferrari to ease the pain of hopefully not a garish blue ball on a red and yellow and white overalls. Hopefully that was just a mock-up. I really hope that was. But yeah, McLaren, no, looking great. But seriously, MasterCard, please don't tank them with your really stingy and desperate loyalty programs. And think of Vincenzo Sospiri. One thing is for sure though, the era of McLaren being a backmarker or midfield team is over. It's done. They have everything going for them. They have a car which is doing the business for them. And the drivers are still something that Red Bull desire. I guess Red Bull are taking a leaf out of Toto Wolff's book and angling for drivers despite them being tied down and showing no signs of leaving their team anytime soon. Something that I discuss more in this video here that you can go and watch right now. And Toto, the Max Verstappen obsession, it needs to stop. It's getting cringy. It's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen!